Richard.
I'm Hannah.
We're with Whirlwind Heating and Refrigeration.
And we're proud to be sponsors of Transition Salt Springs Climate Action Coach Program.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to the second Climate Action Coach webinar, how to plan your rainwater harvesting system. I'm going to pass it off to Brian Young, our director. Go ahead, Brian.
Good evening. My name is Brian Young, and I'm the chair of Transition Salt Spring. We're really excited to see all of you here with us tonight. It's my wish that you're all warm and cozy as you join me and all of us here to learn about and hear about what we can do to store abundant rainwater for our dry summer months. Thanks for joining us, whether you're from Salt Spring Island, Vancouver Island, or the Southern Gulf Islands, where we recently expanded our Climate Action Coach program, thanks to a CRD contribution through Southern Gulf Islands Director Dave Howe. Before we start, I would like to take a moment, however, to acknowledge that we are living in the unceded territories of the Sinchothan and Hokomian speaking peoples. For those of you who'd like to get to know a part of these lands and waters from an Indigenous perspective, I've been enjoying The Saltwater People by the late Richard Elliott, a member of the Sartlip First Nation in neighboring Saanich. Here's the front cover, and you can read about it and download it. I've got a link in the chat, and it tells such a wonderful story about our ecosystems, what they were, and about the culture of the local Indigenous peoples in this area, and certainly as part of South Salt Spring, where I'm currently residing. It also tells us that we're now in the moon that shakes the leaves. That's November, and I saw a lot of that happening today. And for local First Nations, that has meant a time for deer, elk, and duck hunting, and a time when winter supplies are put away for a time when people are kept closer to home. I like to reference that 13 moon calendar developed over millennia by the saltwater people whose winter home is Saanich. It's kind of part of my own journey of reconciliation, and I wish you the best in your own journey, whether you're a settler or a First Nations ancestry or both. Haishika, as they say in Sinchothan, thank you, may we all paddle together. So many of us are aware of the global talks that are happening as we speak in Glasgow, where they're trying to steer a path for humanity that will secure a more livable future in the context of accelerating climate change. While all of that may seem overwhelming, Transition Salt Spring is asking you, our fellow islanders, to focus on what we can do locally together. And to help with that, we published the Climate Action Plan 2.0, that's this baby right here. And it's the focus of everything we do now at Transition Salt Spring, and you can actually download it on our website. And that means working constructively across silos, divides, and differences to find a way for all of us to work together to address climate change in our communities in terms of how we build, what we build, where we build, and how we steward our land and aquatic resources. It also means looking our risks in the eye and coming up with plans to address them in our community. One of the things we can all do together is to take positive steps where we live and work to be part of the solution. Our response at Transition to that is our very first public program, to come out of the Climate Action Plan process, and that's the One Cool Island Climate Action Coach Program. I hope a lot of you have heard about it by now. It's really founded on a simple premise. When faced with all the choices we can make in our lives, making sense of all those options can be really confusing. There are a ton of great incentive programs out there, but how do we make sense of it all? Well, to help stop us from becoming like the proverbial deer in the headlights, think of the Climate Action Coach Program as your own personal navigator to help you walk that last mile before you make decisions that will make your homes more climate resilient, safer, more energy efficient, and comfortable. And aside from all that, these changes can also save you a lot of money. And by doing these things, we can help get you in the game or even deeper into the game of helping our communities become climate smart and ready for the big challenges that lie ahead. We're also hoping that in working together with us, we help build each other's knowledge base for even more action while building our own communities, learning together. There's a Sinchothan word from the folks in Saanich. It's called Quanidal, which I really love, which talks about learning together. Last month, we kicked off the coach program with a great webinar all about heat pumps. About 150 or so of you participated in that one. The folks at Whirlwind Heating and Cooling, who you heard about, who heard from at the beginning of the webinar tonight, along with Fresco Refrigeration, are really happy with the partnership we've created with them as we work together, helping to reduce energy consumption, emissions from our heating while creating jobs for islanders. And that's really a classic win-win from my point of view. On rainwater harvesting, we also have a ton, or maybe more appropriately, tons of tanks or ponds of opportunities. Some of you may have heard about or even participated in the rainwater harvesting rebate, and we were flooded with inquiries and we had to shut off the taps in a mere 6 days. It was an awesome success. As a result, dozens of salt springers are busy buying and installing tanks that will suck up all that rainwater for use in summer gardens next year. That's hundreds of thousands more liters worth of pressure taken off of our wells and aquifers. Now, we couldn't have done this without the generous support of Capital Regional District and Gary Holman, who provided $10,000 in rebates to get the program off the ground. So I'm not sure Maya has Gary arrived yet? Because we would like to bring him in for a few words if possible on what we're looking forward to next year.
I don't see him in the participant list.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thanks, Maya, for checking. So what we're excited to say is that the CRD, with the help of Gary Holman, will be providing renewed funding for the rainwater rebate program next year. That's starting in April 1st of next year. So you can look forward to more. And we do have a wait list for next year. And I kind of think that we're going to be full before we even start. But that's really good news. And I also wanted to say on behalf of the Southern Gulf Islanders who are with us here tonight that we're working hard with Dave Howe and Paul Brent and other folks with the CRD to try to get a version of this program up and running in the Southern Gulf Islands as well. We have similar problems and we share similar geography, and I really hope that'll be the case. So actually, to get things warmed up, we want to warm you up tonight with a poll. Or maybe if Maya or Aaron, can you get the first poll up tonight? We want to find out where you're listening from. Tell us if you're attending from Salt Springs, south of Ganges, north of Ganges, Vancouver Island, maybe Mexico, or one of the other Gulf Islands. I'm seeing lots of action here. We've got, most of us are from Salt Spring, but there are quite a few from Vancouver, more than I would have thought. And a chunk of us from the other Gulf Islands and from the rest of BC too. I'd love to know where you folks are from. Let us know in the chat. It'd be great to know who's listening.
We have a Camrose, Alberta, Brian.
Whoa, awesome. Welcome from across the divide. Right, great to have you all here learning. We're all in this boat together, and no matter where we are, there's a lot we can learn from each other in the Climate Action Coach webinars. So let's put away that poll. And I'd like to turn things over now to Maya Karasfeld, who is one of our two wonderful climate action coaches, who along with Rob Lowry, who some of you may know from his, there he is waving, from his work doing community outreach from Country Grocer. They're both developing a programming like this for all of us here tonight. So Maya, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this webinar, and thank you so much for the wonderful welcome, Brian. I'm actually listening from the traditional territories of the Sauk Nation over here on Vancouver Island, so off island myself, but happy to be part of the community. So I briefly wanted to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the funders and sponsors that we have at the Climate Action Coach program and Transition Salt Spring in general. Already mentioned before was the CRD. Thank you so much for helping us take on this rainwater program. That's amazing. And we also have the Salt Spring Island Foundation, Van City, and Victoria Foundation, who all take a large share in funding the Climate Action Coach program. So thank you so much. Also earlier, we saw a little video from the owners of Whirlwind Heating and Refrigeration, and we also have Fresco Refrigeration, both as new climate action sponsors. And we are super happy to have them as part of the program. And if anyone in chat is interested in becoming a climate action sponsor, they're welcome to get in touch with us. I also want to say a huge shout out to the Salt Spring Island Watershed Protection Alliance. Shannon is joining us today from this wonderful group. I'm sure you guys have all heard of them. They do amazing work and have been longtime supporters and partners of Transition Salt Springs. So thank you for your support. So I want to also mention that we are going to go through quite a bit today. There's a lot to get through. We're going to start off with Shannon, who is going to introduce kind of the importance of rainwater harvesting in general, really the perspective of like watershed level protection and how to get prepared for drier times ahead. And so after her presentation, we will go into speaking with Rhonan and Matt, who are here representing two different companies that focus on Salt Spring Island water services. And they are going to give us lots of amazing advice on how to handle best practices for planning your rainwater harvesting system. However, before we get into these amazing presentations, we do have a short video that is going to really showcase a pretty amazing setup of a rainwater harvesting unit at the property of a fellow named Harry Burton. I'm sure some of you guys are aware of who he is. And Rob, our amazing climate action coach, my partner in crime, he is the videographer of this video. So we're going to go ahead and run that now.
Okay, you're looking at the rainwater collection system, which is coming off about 1,000 square feet of roof, and we're collecting water off both sides of the roof. It's coming down by eaves trough, and we're collecting from both sides. It flows into this garbage pail here, and then I simply have a sump pump that will, when this pail is full, it pumps into one of our 3 tanks, whichever I choose. Right now we're filling tank number 2 because tank number 1 is already full. From the sump then, the water gets pumped over here underground to one of our 3 tanks. And this is tank number 1, and it's already full. You can tell by the dull sound when I pound on it. And so right now we're filling tank number 2, which is about 3/4 full. And I control which tank it goes into by valves at the bottom of the verticals that go up into the tanks. This valve is open, which allows the water from that little sump pump and the garbage pail to go flowing up here into tank number 2, and we're filling tank number 2 now. And down below, it's got a solid sound. Up top, it's got a hollow sound, which means we're somewhere in about here for level. And when this one's full, then we're going to start filling number 3, which is completely empty. So tank number 3, no water in it yet. It's the one that's going to be filled next, but you can tell right away by the sound. That hollow sound tells you the tank is empty. So when I need water, it's a very simple system as well. I can select which tank I want to use, and basically then I select tank number 1, let's say, and let me see. So I open tank number 1, turn on the pump, and then that directs water to wherever I need it in the orchard. And there are 55 45-gallon drums in the orchard, all over the orchard, that I can pump to, and I can also pump into the greenhouse, or I can pump to sprinklers on the garden. So I have a choice of where it's going to. And that's how I get it out of these tanks. On some of the barrels out there, the barrels are mostly storage for, in this case, blueberries, and also for little trees. And so they are spread out through the orchard. The water comes out of them with a bucket, whereas in the garden I can use a sprinkler or a hose to get it to where I want in the garden. Once I have the pump on, then I can go to any one of the 55 barrels in the orchard and just open this valve, and that will fill the particular barrel that I want filled. The other thing I can do, I can go over to this sprinkler system here. I can turn this sprinkler system on, and that will water this quarter of the garden. Or I can also take the hose and I can direct the water into this hose that will allow me to sprinkle other parts of the garden if I want. So it's a pretty flexible system, and the overall system now is storing about 3 times 3,000 plus 2,500, which is roughly 11,500 gallons of water, rainwater. Normally that would get me through a summer, but this particular summer was extra dry and I only got through to about August 28th. So that's why I need another tank to get me through a dry summer. And I'll get a 5th tank if I need it, but right now I think number 4 might do it. Thank you for looking at the water system that we have on Salt Spring to keep this incredible orchard going. We use only rainwater if we can get the right amount of tanks, and I think that creates a better system anyways, because rainwater is always a little bit warmer than groundwater, which is a well, and I don't particularly want to draw water out of the reservoirs down below, so I'd rather just do the rainwater. So I would also like to thank Transition Salt Spring for the help that they have arranged, the financial help for purchasing tank number 4.
Thank you, Darlene, for sharing the video, and thank you, Rob, for taking it, and thank you, Harry, for letting us peruse the orchard with you in your and your rainwater harvesting system. So that was a really impressive system and a fantastic example of what we would like to encourage more people to eventually get to. But first, we have a question for you. We have our second poll for the evening, if Rhonan can put it up for us. And the question is, do you collect rainwater already? So if you can go ahead and answer that. And also, if you can answer, what is your water source? So are you on a well or are you serviced by a water district? Looks like we have a lot of people who aren't already collecting rainwater and some that collect non-potable. That's good. A very few that collect potable. Potable is hard to set up, so it's cool to see those of you that are there. And it looks like we have about half and half for well and water district with a few others. I'd be curious to hear what you guys get your water from. If you're willing to share in chat, please go ahead and pop that in chat.
It's also interesting, Maya, that we have a ton of people who don't have collection systems yet.
Yeah.
It's great. It's kind of like the heat pump webinar where 92% plus of people didn't have a heat pump. So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of impact we can have in helping people make this step.
Could you maybe just clarify what do you mean by potable versus non-potable?
Oh, sure, certainly, Andre. Well, potable water would be water that is used for drinking purposes inside the house. And non-potable water is not used for those purposes. It would mostly be used for irrigation. It could technically also be used for flushing your toilets and washing your clothes. But a non-potable system often is not connected to the indoor plumbing of your house. All right, so fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our first presentation. So Shannon Cowan is joining us from SWIPA. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you. Shannon has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to rainwater and watersheds and watershed health and how to be an amazing watershed steward. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about why collecting rainwater is one of the best things you can do for watershed health. So go ahead, Shannon.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya, and thank you, Transition Salt Spring, for having me. I'm coming to everyone tonight from Humatetsum, which is Mount Maxwell on Salt Spring Island in the Hokominum and Sinjothan people traditional territory, and I'm very grateful to be here tonight. So I think I'm sharing my screen now, and I'll just press play on that. Hopefully that's bringing up the slides. Salt Spring Island Watershed Protection Alliance has been involved with watershed protection on Salt Spring since 2013. And interestingly, when Maya was introducing me earlier, mentioning the sponsorship of Transition Salt Spring, I know Transition Salt Spring has been around a lot longer. Essentially, the Watershed Protection Alliance is actually a conglomerate or an alliance of groups. So it's an alliance of both government and non-governmental groups, as well as other volunteers and organizations that have expertise in freshwater management. And the purpose of the alliance is to provide a framework for integrated and cooperative freshwater planning, policy development, and coordinated assisted implementation of policy for freshwater health on Salt Springs specifically. And we're hopeful that some of the work of the Alliance carries over to other Gulf Islands and other parts of the region. In this diagram, it's a little bit full of acronyms, but it's just showing you that everyone in blue here, the Islands Trust, the CRD, some of the ministries, and various groups on Salt Spring Island, including Cushion Lake Stewardship Committee and the Water Company and Water Preservation Society and Agricultural Alliance, they're all on our steering committee. The groups that you see in green, Island Health, Ministry of Agriculture, and Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, these are on a project basis, so have worked with us in various ways on planning and integrated watershed protection. And then we have a technical working group as well that's a regular group involved with the Watershed Protection Alliance. And so I'm going to show you a little bit more about rainwater harvesting from the perspective of why. I think many of you are here tonight because you're already very interested in getting on with the setting up of your system. So you may not need a lot of prompting as to why, but then we're going to dive a little bit into some of the resources that SWIPA is offering already and where you can find them. So here you'll see a diagram. This is taken from the Live Water Smart 2012 publication. So many years ago, Living Water Smart in BC. And it just is an example of the water cycle. So when we're talking about an island, because we are here on Salt Spring, all of the water that lands on Salt Spring as precipitation is going somewhere. And we're hoping that many of you are here already because you're interested in how you can catch and sink and slow and store and use that rain before it makes its way to the ocean. This is also just to show you that the more you have ponds and the more we can keep the water in the streams and in the forests, the less will run off quickly to the ocean. And also because of a nice cut through here, you can see that groundwater has both shallow flow and also deep groundwater. And we have a groundwater well here showing a place of extraction, but also that the plants are taking up the water and water is evaporating both from vegetation and from the creeks, just to show all of the ways that water comes and the ways that water flows and goes. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a little bit about where we use water the most and where the opportunities are with rainwater harvesting. Living Water Smart came out in 2012, just, at the end of already, I think, over a decade of really understanding and knowing that climate change was a reality. And we're still working today to really reduce our water footprint, to develop ways to address the impacts of the increased drought, the warmer, drier summers and the wetter, cooler winters that we're experiencing in our region. So of course, rainwater harvesting is contributing to this. And many of you have also probably seen this waterscape for the Gulf Islands, if you are in the Gulf Islands. If you're not, there's probably a difficulty to read it on the slide tonight, but this is something that BC Ferries has, Islands Trust and other partners were involved in the development of this wonderful resource. And I just really wanted to highlight over here on the bottom right, where it says that having enough water and increasing storage and showing us the way that keeping our forest ecosystems and keeping our water in the system and slowing it from running off and evaporating is all contributing more to groundwater recharge and keeping the sponge of the island filled when the water has fallen on that footprint. So just again, a graphical way and a wonderful way to walk children through how important it is to conserve and to capture and store and use and reuse rain before it makes its way back to the water cycle, the ocean, and evaporation. And if all of the water that falls on Salt Spring is in this pie or on your wherever you're calling in from tonight, the 100% of the water is the whole circle. This is demonstrating on Salt Spring Island how much is in the lakes and streams and running off to the ocean. So we've got more than 50%, 54% running off. How much is evapotranspirating, so evaporating directly from lakes and soils and also moving through the vegetation, 34 to 36%. And then this small little pie piece the groundwater recharge amount, if 100%, not 900 to 1,000 millimeters per year that falls on the footprint of the island, only 10% of that to 12% of that is actually going into the deep groundwater and recharging that sponge. And that sliver represents 2.4 to 6.1% of that groundwater recharge, or only 0.3 to 0.6, not even 1% of all of the rain that falls on the island is getting withdrawn by groundwater well users. And so this just really highlights that the groundwater use is precarious and precious. And the more that we can use this evapotranspiration amount and the amount that would be running right off and not even stored in the ponds, wetlands, lakes, and streams, which is all that we can do to harvest rain and keep it where it is and use it and reuse it before it makes its way, then we can really use these other 80% of the pie and save that groundwater and keep it in the system. On the left, you can see the number of groundwater wells that are already on this footprint of Salt Spring Island. So many, over 2,000 wells. Many of them are not active, but most of them, more than 80% of them, are actively pumping and withdrawing groundwater to support our freshwater systems, including our economy and our human systems. And about half of the island, maybe a little bit more than that, is currently using groundwater wells as a primary source. On the right, you can see our watersheds. And so again, Salt Spring Island's footprint is filled with many different sizes and shapes of watersheds. Watersheds are the surface area that collects water and runs off a single point to the ocean. So our largest one is the Fulford watershed here that I'm highlighting with my cursor. And we have St. Mary Lake and Cushion Lake, and then many other secondary, tertiary, and even smaller watersheds. And so again, the message is that if we can keep the recharge areas that are the most precious, that are gaining that sliver of groundwater, that 10% to 12%, if we can keep those recharging our sponge and harvest more of that rain that would be running off and evaporating, then we're doing the services to really keep our ecosystem services healthy in this time of drastic climate change and crisis. And that goes towards an economic reality that we're all facing in being able to keep the water for the use for the ecology first and the human second, but the human system is in crisis almost as much as the climate crisis. And so this rainwater harvesting it's a no-brainer. It's why you're all here tonight. So I won't harp on it too much more. So a little bit about SWIPA. SWIPA is the short form for the Watershed Protection Alliance that I showed on that first slide. And this is just a screenshot of our website where you can find a lot of rainwater harvesting information. And I'm just going to slice through a little bit of it and then turn it over to some of other speakers tonight to give you some highlights of specific systems and setting up your system. We have over 36 rainwater harvesting articles, and you just need to go to the news and posts part of our website to find those. And so here's a closer up view. If you go into news and posts or directly into rain resources, you can find probably the jackpot. What most of you would be looking for is the Salt Spring Island non-potable rainwater harvesting best practices guidebook. More than 40 pages of wonderful information, much of which has been compiled from many groups involved with SWIPA and many other professionals. In terms of what you need when you have a roof like this, what do you need to do to get this much water to this part of your garden that you want to get water to? Or if you're doing some potable, it does have a little bit about potable and a little bit about bringing non-potable water into the house, just to give you a flavor for what kind of regulations and authorizations you'll need to be considering when you're starting to plan your system. So that does go beyond non-potable, and it's definitely the jackpot. If you haven't already checked that out, I really recommend it. Some of the other items that we have developed and compiled at SWIPA, which again, the website is swipa.org, is that we have that guidebook. We have a virtual tour of rainwater harvesting systems. We have an online calculator where you can find out, based on the area that you'd like to irrigate, how much storage you will need to be able to work towards in your system. Maybe some of you can get that right off the bat. Some of us need to take time to work up to that and add cisterns where and when we can. And there's quite a lot about different types of what you'll need for different types of times of the year for growing different types of crops. and many other rainwater storage facts and information about supplies and materials and who to go to. This is just a snapshot of who we already have on our virtual tour that you can take at any time on our website. The Rainbow Road Gardens, Wildwood Crescent, Eagle Hill, Sun Eagle, West Eagle Drive up there on that part of the island that's actually got a real difficulty with groundwater and also is a little bit beyond the North Salt Spring water system. So they've really gotten creative with their systems and do a lot of potable rainwater harvesting. And we have another tour site on Malaview there, and we have some in development. So hopefully you'll see some more. These are mostly slideshow versions or stills of photos. And you also have contact information for these folks in case you want to get in touch with them and go see their system in person. Rain comes in, like I already said, 900 to 1,000 millimeters per year on Salt Spring. So I just wanted to demonstrate what time of the year we get the most. So you can see along the bottom the months of the year and total precipitation in millimeters on the left-hand side. So each of these bars represent how much average in that month. And the season for really collecting rain is February, March, and April, when pollen can also be a bit of an issue. So that's highlighted in our guidebook, and maybe some of our speakers will refer to that tonight. Some of the considerations that you want to have when setting up your system would be your roof area or your collection surface, the temperature, which affects how much water stays in the system versus evaporating, and whether there's going to be a spring drought period that year. You may want to be collecting through the winter and not going to overflow at that time. One of the items on our website is a newly developed this process diagram or decision tree. If you're doing various kinds, on the left side, you'll see the various kinds of rainwater harvesting. So again, non-potable is for outdoor use only, or you can do non-potable for indoor use, but you'll see that the process of your authorizations has a few more steps to it. Just to highlight this evening, because I don't have a lot of time, I'll just go through the top one, the non-potable outdoor use. You would start by taking a look at the Land Use Bylaw 355 on the Islands Trust website, or calling me and I can help you. And the lot line setback and the height of your system are the first considerations in terms of what you're planning to do. And then whether those are within the bylaw or whether they're not. So again, if you have if you're going beyond the restrictions that are in the bylaw, then it would be yes, you would follow this pathway. You would call Islands Trust and talk to them about system siting and whether you require a development permit or variance permits. You might require engineering, or it might be recommended, but it's probably not required for a non-potable system. There's definitely no CRD building permit required for non-potable systems. So there was a myth for a while that it depended on the height of the system. And even though seismic is a consideration, there is no CRD building permit required for your non-potable outdoor use rainwater system. You could go directly to install if you didn't have any problems with, or if you weren't exceeding or going beyond the restrictions in the land use bylaw, for example. So I won't go into more detail, but this is available on our website, and certainly you can follow up with me. There are news posts about it to tell you a little bit more about this diagram. And so I just wanted to finish off with a spur to action to encourage. I think, again, many of you are probably here tonight because you don't yet collect rain and you'd like to do so. So I don't need to be preaching to the choir, but the goal that SWIPA has set is 1,000 new systems, rainwater collection systems on Salt Spring in the next 5 years to help us save 3 million US gallons each summer. And that could translate based on a per capita usage that has been calculated for surface water systems, water district water of 208 liters per capita per day. That's the current figure that we've calculated is being used on Salt Spring Island. It's way below the provincial average. So it is already conserving, but if it's based on that, then saving 3 million gallons per year is actually 150 more people that can be on other freshwater, using freshwater on Salt Spring Island, because we're saving it from the lakes and the groundwater. So this is the goal with rainwater systems that goes beyond the goal at your own property and your own residence and your own life, and the part that we can all play climate action wise. This is the community goal, to be able to have a more resilient community. So with that, I will turn it back to Maya, I think.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And what an amazing goal to save 3 million US gallons each summer, and really translating that to 150 people use for 150 people on the island is quite the imagery there. So thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. Okay, so moving on, we are actually going to go from the kind of reason why and go into the how. So we're going to introduce two wonderful human beings who work on Salt Spring Island. We have Matt Nowell and Rhonan Heitzmann, and they represent two different companies here on Salt Spring. Matt represents the Rainwater Connection, and Rhonan represents the Salt Spring Water Company. And these lovely gentlemen are going to give us a presentation on exactly how to start planning for the rainwater system and what considerations you have to make in order to get started. Now, before they jump in and get into the presentation, though, I think we do have a short video to show again. So if Darlene can go ahead and share that video, and then we'll have Rhonan and Matt introduce themselves.
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're collecting off this building. It's perfect setup. It has a nice metal roof. We have the carport area and the house. Two downspouts here. Run along the house toward the ocean, and basically it daylights out over the bank. So what we're going to do is collect that water, pump it back up to storage so that it can be utilized for an irrigation system. Okay, so with a basic system, you could just take from this downspout and bring it into the top of a tank and have it be a gravity-fed storage tank. And you'd prep the area here and locate a tank that would fit the area. That's a great way to go. It does limit you just to collecting off of this downspout and this portion of roof and not collecting the whole building. And then again, some people don't like to have tanks right beside their home. So if that's not an issue, then that's definitely the simplest way to go. So currently the rain just daylights out over the bank here. So everything coming from the house just goes out over here where you can see it pouring through the 4-inch line. We're going to intercept it a little closer to the fence. So it's, you know, we can re-divert it over to a flat spot that we've located where we'll actually just put in a small pump chamber. From that pump chamber, we'll basically, you know, every time it fills up to about 30 gallons, it'll pump all the way through this lawn area to 4 tanks that are located underneath the deck. Okay, so we have a perfect spot on this property to locate these leg tanks, and there'll be a total of 4. So they're out of, you know, they're just tucked under the deck, out of sight, and they'll all be connected together. So once the line from the pump chamber pumps water to it, they'll all equalize, and then they'll also be tied into an overflow line, as well as having a submersible pump, which will supply and connect to the existing drip system.
All right, thank you. Take it away, Matt and Rhonan.
Shall I start, Rhonan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So for those that don't know me, I'm Matt. I've been on Salt Spring for close to 9 years now. And since moving here, I've been installing rain systems pretty much from the get-go. My background has mostly been irrigation. So I also have an irrigation company called Gulf Islands Irrigation. And I've been doing that kind of business for about 20 years, mostly in the mainland. But it became quickly apparent to me that there was a lot of wasted water happening, and people were not really paying attention to how their systems were running, and quite often overwatering and wasting the precious resource. So being here on the Gulf Islands, obviously that resource is even more precious than being in the city and turning on the tap. And people are more connected with what it is they have, or more like what it is they don't have in some cases. So I do have a presentation which I'll go through too after Rhonan has introduced himself, and we'll kind of go back and forth a bit and kind of walk you through how I would approach a rain system and help people kind of dial in, you know, what would best suit their property, their budget, and really what the end goal is, whether they can achieve that right away or whether it's just a plan that we can work on over an extended period of time. So over to you, Rhonan.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, my name is Rhonan Heitzmann. I grew up on Salt Spring, moved here in 1983 and graduated in 1991. I have a diverse background, but I've worked a lot in ecological building. And since 2012, I've been operating Salt Spring Water Company, which we deliver bulk water. Also, we deliver water storage tanks. So through this work, I've been able to really see, where groundwater, has problems, and how storage, how important storage is with our seasonal drought. Every summer we have a drought of some kind, and every winter we get lots of rain, which lots of it runs off. And so it's really become acute to me. I'm acutely aware of how important it is to, capture our winter rains. And it's so important because it offsets the stress on our groundwater collectively. Everything we all do helps each other. And it also helps offset the community water supply in the lakes. A lot of people don't think about that if they're on a community water system, that catching rainwater can actually save the water in the lakes as well. And that's really important. I'm also an affordable housing advocate, and water supply is a big concern for people, and I can really see how using rainwater can supply especially small dwellings, secondary dwellings. Lots of places in the world do it, and we have close to a meter of rain every winter. So with the adequately sized system, you can supply rainwater to anyone really. So this is important. Some people don't think about this, but you catch rainwater to supply your simple things like maybe supply your toilets, and that can save up to 30% of household use. That's one way that in addition to irrigation, that it can be applied to your household needs. So I was checking my notes here. Yeah, so the ability to supply rainwater for secondary dwellings. I mean, there's a really exciting thing that happened today. Just hot off the press news, the LTC has adopted recommendations from the Housing Task Force that I'm part of to go forward with allowing secondary dwellings and accessory buildings around the island. And this is really exciting because it's an opportunity for rainwater harvesting to be used to supply that water supply for those small dwellings where surface water or groundwater might be a concern. So this will be a really exciting real world use case to help our community coming up. And of course, what's really exciting also is that people are already using rainwater to supply 100% of their principal residences. And I see large houses complete with irrigation systems, everything supplied 100% by rainwater. It's all about sizing and designing the system, and really about storage. And Matt will be able to tell you lots more about that. So over to you, Matt.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen here. So understanding the benefits and opportunities for rain harvesting, well, is quite apparent. And as Shannon has shown to us quite well in her presentation, what basically how the system can alleviate pressure on the local aquifers and watersheds. And just simply by, it doesn't really matter how much you collect. I mean, if you can just start off with a small amount, it all helps towards the bigger picture of relieving pressure on our local watersheds and aquifers. So we'll go a little bit into that, but mostly, what we're going to talk about is what is it that you need to do or start looking at when you want to put a system in on your property. What are some of the constraints, and what are the costs, and how hard or how easy is it to incorporate it into your own property. We could look into also how to maintain and operate the system once it's built, if there's enough time for us to get into that, but I'll continue through. So pretty much, as like if the water just comes down and just runs off, it just basically gets wasted and goes to the ocean, creates erosion issues. And why not harness that extra water that gets saturated, with the oversaturated ground during the winter months? If we can harness that water, catch it, collect it, and then save it for the drier periods, then everybody's winning. And you're able to accomplish more on your own property by means of growing food or irrigating plants or just general outdoor use. And, you know, not every system has to be huge. It's nice to collect and store as much as possible. Systems can be modified and expanded as you go. You know, the not one size fits all approach is that, you know, if you can do your part and just kind of get in touch with what it is you can collect and how it gets used, and you know, you quickly learn, you know, what it is, and you get connected to the water use on your own property and your own water requirements, versus just turning on the tap and, you know, always having the water be there. By actually monitoring the water coming into your tank and then it depleting as you use it, it really dials in for people how better to use the water, and also what they can do to, you know, make it more efficient and use it more wisely. Quite often people ask me, you know, so how much water do I need? Well, it really is all about, you know, what is your end use? What are you trying to achieve? You know, are you a heavy water user that likes to pressure wash everything and have a clean car? Or are we just talking about, you know, basically just saving it and using it to grow our own food and irrigate our plants and keep the house maintained? So what's happening around us to make harvesting a better option? We've all experienced the drier summer, and that was a bit of an eye-opener for many. As Harry mentioned, he ran out of water with his tanks, and he's looking to get another tank this year with the help of Transitions. That's great, and this rebate program is super, that allows, you know, that to happen. And that's just it. You know, it's as the climate changes and things get drier, people can assess their needs, and as they move forward, they can expand their system, and then they're better set, and it alleviates more pressure and allows more options for, you know, like Rhonan said, it allows more options for other people to get housing, and there's more water available, generally speaking. Moving on to the increase in population. Well, yeah, so with more demand, you know, the water obviously is going to get stressed, and we're basically up against moratoriums that don't allow people to move here, or new buildings to get built, low cost housing, everything like that. It's all becoming quite a challenge with the water supply. So if we can take the outdoor water use stressor off of those supplies, then, you know, that's going to make more room available for people to actually get into a house that can be supplied by decent water. A lot of water use now, people are homesteading too, of course, even more than they were before, and they're wanting to grow their own food. And this would be a great, you know, rain harvesting is a great opportunity to actually collect, store, and use the water for your irrigation, for your veggie beds and such like that. Moving along for tourism, well, this island kind of expands and almost bursts in the summer, and, you know, that's the critical point where we basically have the least amount of precipitation landing on the island and the highest demand. So if we can store and save water through the winter months and utilize it through those drier periods, again, that just all helps towards the bigger cause of, you know, not stressing out our local aquifers and wells running dry and such. And then another thing that came up, which has been top of mind, especially after this last summer, would be fire suppression needs. If you are considering storing water for fire suppression, you just have to be mindful that it's good that it stays there. Like, you have to, if that's what it's for, you can't really be tapping into it and taking it away. It should be there so that you're safe. You know, it's a comfort zone to have it sitting there, ready for use, if hopefully when it's not needed. So getting into the uses, pretty straightforward. We've got our outdoor general use, which could be power washing, general house maintenance, just regular hose watering down your garden. We've got irrigation, and then we also have fire protection, which I just mentioned. for people to create the buffer, have a buffer. I'm going to run through all the catchment size and source for your roofing. Basically what it is you require for, how much can you collect off your roof basically? And, what is it you can capture and from what portion of roof, and do you need to capture the whole roof? We'll talk a little bit about first flush diverters and diversion lines, and then we'll go into tank locations and their bases, as well as pumps, gravity feed options, and then storage tanks, and then the end use. So Rhonan, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in here for a moment, I've got to fix something up here on my end.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's really interesting to see all of the different various kinds of rainwater harvesting there already is in this island. I've really, in my work, I've really seen a lot of it, and I was really, this year was a real test year because we had an unusual season in that it was really dry in the spring. As Shannon pointed out earlier, lots of people harvest their rain in February, March, and April. This year we had like 20% of the normal rainfall in those months. So it highlighted for me a couple of things: importance of storing water in December and January, and also then we had this really extended drought that started really early, and I observed that groundwater started draining out earlier than usual, and it started stressing wells earlier than usual. Fortunately, we got some heavy rains in September and October, which started turning that around. And I thought it was a really interesting test year for people doing rainwater harvesting, and I was surprised how few systems I was called to service. And I was expecting more. Maybe that was partly because we started getting rain in September and October. But yeah, it's really interesting, that if you catch enough, it's all about storage. If you catch enough, you can last a long time with it. And so storage really is the key. Sometimes people ask about, how much they should capture, and often a really quick thing I tell people is, basically you look at the size. Say you're doing a non-potable system, you just want to start catching some water. A really quick way to do is think about, how much space do you have to put a tank, and as soon as you're thinking about storing water, just try to get the biggest tank that you can fit, and the biggest tank that you can afford. And that's a great place to start. You can always expand after, but you can never, once you start thinking about storing water, you can never have too much. And so that's a nice way to sort of basically get started.
Hey, Rhonan, maybe while we're waiting to go back to the presentation, can you talk a little bit about ponds versus tanks? Our incentive program was for tanks for sure, but what are the possibilities with ponds from your point of view?
Yeah, so what I observe with ponds is that ponds can hold an enormous amount of water, and I've seen different sizes of ponds. One summer, someone moved down one summer, and he started this massive orchard, and he had to irrigate it all. And I was delivering water to him twice a week to his tanks, and he built this giant pond. That was a few years ago. I've never been there again. So two truckloads of water, like that's 3,000 gallons a week at least he was using. He was able to replace all of that with this one pond. So, but it was it's a bit of an expensive infrastructure piece, but once it's done, you can capture a very large amount of water, and then it all depends on the size. So if you have a large property, then that can be a way to go, especially if you really want to do a lot of irrigation and farming. Yeah, and then actually, and Matt might have some more comments about that too.
So yeah, the ponds is a great option. Like people, it's not always necessarily about putting water in a tank. There's active systems, which is what that will be classed as, and then there's passive systems too. And passive meaning that if you don't want to put it in a tank, or you don't have the means to, then we can just redivert water into swales and kind of make it go into mulch basins and plant accordingly. And it's just the idea of sinking the water into the ground rather than having it cascaded above the surface and just run off and create erosion issues and things like that. So I think it's really key just to kind of get that out there, that it doesn't necessarily always have to be putting water in a tank. So ponds are a great option too if your property lends itself to being able to put a pond in a low area and direct your house water or any drainage water, ditch water into those culverts or pond areas, and that's great. Whether you're lucky enough to have a clay-based area or if you need to put a liner in, that's really a great resource to pull from for irrigation and such later on. So I'm gonna attempt at sharing my screen again with everybody. So please just bear with me. I'm going to try this one more time, and let's see if we're where we need to be. Yes, there we go. We're winning. Can everybody see that?
Looks good.
Okay.
You got a new career coming up, Matt.
Oh, thank you. It's not one I'm all that excited about. But yeah, so getting into, the actual how would you build a system? So maybe people get a bit hung up about where to put a tank, what size tank to get. Do I need multiple tanks? What is it that I have to figure out here? Well, really we're going to start with your roof. And to give you an idea of what it is you can collect off your roof, you have this simple equation here, and this is in an ideal situation without factoring in, efficiencies like, is your house covered with trees, and do you have good exposure to rain, or you got things that may reduce the rain that hits that roof, and things like that. Is the roof clean? Are we dealing with plugged gutters? So there will be losses that will come about with the water that lands on your roof. You may not get every last drop. So this is just a rounded up number per square meter. We're talking about a liter of water. So you multiply that by 1,000 square feet and you're off to the races, right? You kind of start to get a good idea of what it is you can collect, and then from there you figure out what it is you want to store and how much you can store. Getting into roof types, obviously I think everybody realizes that metal is the way to go. It's the prime roof choice. Stay away from asphalt, but if you do currently have an asphalt roof, it's not to say that you can't collect off it. It just means that you're limited with what the end use would be for using that type of water. There are fungicides and things like that to inhibit moss growth on asphalt shingle, and of course it's an oil bitumen product, so it's not the most favorable. That being said, some wood shingles too, they also have a fire retardant in them, and so just do your homework on what kind of roof you have and what you may be getting for quality of water. After that, it's just about mapping your flow, as I call it. So depending on the layout of your house, it's never going to be all the roof comes to one gutter, one downspout, and you're lucky enough to just put your tank right there and it's done. Quite often you'll have multiple roof sections, multiple downspouts. Typically, they would run into one universal drain, which hopefully in an ideal situation that would be the case, and you can maybe tap into it where it drains out, and you can harness the whole entire roof in that manner. But also if it is chopped up and you're not able to do that, then your options become a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more creative, let's say, whether that means you have multiple tanks in multiple sites, or you use those tanks as pump chambers that would essentially pump to the storage area. There are many options to kind of figure out. So just a simple walk around your house and taking in, where are the downspouts? What size roof does that downspout serve? And so how much am I going to capture off that size roof through this downspout? Or maybe it's not so much. Maybe I should move to the other side and do that portion of roof instead. So, ideally, we want to try and capture everything, especially through the drier periods. Quite often in the winter, people are overflowing their tanks by this time of year. So it's not an issue getting a tank filled. The main thing is really when you start using that water from May through the summer is the replenishment factor. So we start getting less and less rain through those periods. And if you have a larger catchment area, then the replenishment is obviously going to be larger too. So this just gives you a quick insight on what Salt Spring gets for rain, averaging 40 and a half inches a year. The majority of that happening between October and March. And of course, nobody's irrigating or hanging out on the deck or pressure washing or doing anything with that water whilst it's landing on the roof. Everyone's just hunkered down and trying to stay dry, right? So, and then you can see quite quickly, as soon as you hit April, May, June, the rainfall amounts diminish quite quick. And that's where the larger roof areas really come into play to replenish those tanks as you start using the water. First flush diverters. So, to a first flush diverter, basically, it's more commonplace for a potable system. It essentially washes the roof and discards the first few millimeters that land on the roof. And that takes care of any contaminants that may be sitting on the roof, dust, pollen, animal feces, general, just airborne contaminants that can be sitting there. Especially after long extended periods, there's not only the pollen season in late March, early April to consider discarding. Actually, people just discard that whole cycle. You don't even collect rain during those periods. But also in the summer, after there's been extended dry time or dry days, your roof will become quite dirty and dusty. And so it's often common practice to just discard the first rain or two rains to essentially wash your roof and gutter system before you begin collecting again. And this just helps with maintenance. It helps with water quality in your storage tanks. And if you can keep your water quality high, then obviously everything downstream of that's going to be better. So once you've figured out, what it is you can collect off your house, and you now need to figure out what size type tank you want, and where is it going to go. Quite often people, there are smaller tanks, or some people don't put tanks right beside their house, but it depends on what space is available, and if aesthetics are an issue, people don't want to look at the tank right next to their front door. Typically you would collect and pump to an area that's kind of a bit more out of sight, a bit more convenient, a bit more suitable, and you'd prepare a base, a pretty good compacted base, and that's where you would allow your storage tanks to sit. In these pictures here, you can see the gravel base being compacted. It's pretty important if you're linking up several tanks together that they don't settle. Obviously, there's pipe connections between them all, and settling is obviously not going to be much good for those fittings and connections. There are obviously other tank options, which would be burial tanks, above ground corrugated steel and liner, and then of course concrete as well. Getting to be more expensive with those options. Obviously, we do live on a rock, so it's not always, you don't always have the ability to blast down and put a tank in the ground. You also have to consider the water table as well. So tanks will become buoyant and pop out of the ground if they're not installed properly. And so, once you've decided on a tank location, a tank type, it's just a matter of doing your due diligence and figuring out how best can I install this? How can I access this area if I need a machine for it? Can I actually get the tank that I've chosen through the gate? Or do I have to go over a fence? Or what has to happen there? So those are just some key things to consider as far as picking a tank and a location for it. So getting into pumps and storage tanks, this really refers to, pumping from the house. Like if you were having to collect at several different locations on the house, or if gravity wasn't on your side and all your drain lines came to a certain spot that you just had to put a pump tank in the ground, and that enabled you to collect all of the entire roof, then you would, much like on Harry's example on the first video there, he had a garbage can, which is an above ground great solution, quick and easy. And, basically a pump chamber is just that. It's just a tank above ground or below ground that can collect and then pump it to a storage system. From there, depending on your end use, you'd likely you have options of either pumping from your storage tank to supply an irrigation system or something, or you could do a gravity fed system, which quite often people always ask me, so can I gravity feed my veggie garden, and will I get enough flow and such? You're only going to get half a PSI for every foot of head. So it's not that it can't be done, but it's good basically for filling watering cans or sitting there with a slow hose line, right? So quite often people opt for putting in a small submersible pump or a booster pump and just getting the pressure they need to operate an irrigation system or get the water to where they need it. So how much water I put here do you spend? But it's like, it's kind of like a bank, right? You kind of bank your water. You save it up in the winter and you spend it in the summer. And if you fall short, then maybe you lose a few plants here and there. So I just did a few numbers here on what typical water use may be. And, I think people are more moving away from the high pressure washer situation, the big gas gargler, but, they're quite a heavy user. And this was based on like 10 minutes of use. So, quite quickly you can see like a garden hose, you could be anywhere between 5 and 8 gallons a minute when you've got that hose running. And, to really gauge what it is that you need, if this is new to you and you're really trying to dial in, like, how much water do I actually need? It's really a matter of you just jotting down on some paper or doing some homework on what is it that I do with my water in the summer? Like, how often do I water my plants and how long for? How long do I run that hose for? What is it that you're doing? And there's quite simple ways and affordable ways. You can have hose tap meters. You can put little digital meters on many hose fittings, and you can actually monitor what kind of water use you're doing and using. And that really gets people in tune with, okay, so wow, that was actually quite a lot of water, and maybe they'll be more efficient with their use and might find more ways to save it, and maybe do less things that aren't necessary, right? It's not just about saving the rain and utilizing the rain as much as you can. It's also, it's twofold. You kind of have to dial it back and save and be efficient and just reduce and basically be smart about how water gets used. So with the video that you saw of me earlier, that was an installation that we put in at the start of this month, and this is the finished product. So you're looking at 4 tanks there, 4 lead tanks, which are a great option to slide under deck space. You're not stuck with one tank, the standard big 3,000 gallon tanks that you see dotted around the Gulf Islands. There are multiple options to be creative. You can part bury some of the above ground tanks too, up to 20%, I believe. So, if height is an issue, you can always consider burying them down a foot or 2. These tanks I've used them plenty of times on jobs. This was kind of like a really great, a great project, because the roof on this particular house, and as you can see from the write-up, was really quite large. And so because they had such a large roof and very little requirement for irrigation, they are able to get through their irrigation requirements, pretty much year round without having to supplement. Because with the 2,800 square foot for the house and 500 for the outbuilding, 3,300 square feet total catchment with 4,000 gallons of storage, they have potential for 70,000 gallons of collection. of which, you know, most of that is going to be October to February. At least half of that is going to be just overflowing starting from today, kind of thing. So, you know, what it comes down to is in a year with 85% efficiency, they got 70,000 gallons that they'll be able to collect. They're using 2,400 gallons a month. And, you know, as that'll basically give them 7 weeks. If it didn't rain for 7 weeks from May until that 7-week period, they'd be able to irrigate their property. But of course, it will rain through May and June. We have had lots of rain in the past through June, also known as January. And so you can see the replenishment numbers there based on the rainfall amounts for those months. And so it just shows you that, you know, on one side, yes, it's nice to have a lot of storage as much as you can, but then it also has to fit with what it is you're actually doing with the water. And do you need that much storage? A lot of people tend to need quite a lot more than this. This is kind of a bit of an anomaly. And that's why I like it so much, because it's like a perfect setup, a large roof, not a lot of storage, and it covers everything that they're trying to achieve. And if things change on that property, then there's room for expansion, of course. They've got lots of catchment potential. It's yeah, it's great. And I appreciate Transition Salt Spring having me on as a speaker, and happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was a wonderful presentation. And yeah, the chat's just blowing up with amazing conversation. So we'll definitely get to all of those questions that you guys have in chat. I see that Rhonan and Shannon have been busy answering away some of the questions, but we'll definitely elaborate on some of them verbally as well, I think. But before that, Brian, you mentioned that it seems Gary has been able to join us after all. So should we quickly pop over to him before we get into questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's drop over to Gary.
Okay.
We're going to spotlight you, Gary, so get your hair combed.
It's too late for that. No, thanks, Brian. And my apologies for being late, and congratulations on another excellent webinar. The last one you did on energy conservation had about the same number of people attending, and it really is testament to the fact that not only are you doing your job, but you know, I think the community is really ready for this kind of information, and this is a crucial role you're playing. I think you already mentioned the rebate program and the remarkable take up on that. And I think you've already committed CRD funding for next year, which I think I can confirm. We're pretty confident we can at least replicate the same amount of funding. We'll see if there's room in the budget to do more, you know, given the excess demand. We may adjust the rebate rates. And I just wanted to mention the reason we focused it on private well owners, and of course you could direct these measures at virtually any water district on Salt Spring, including North Salt Spring. But those water districts do have access to other funding, whereas well owners, once you've made that initial investment, really you don't have access to support for measures like these. And these measures are in the public interest. It's not, of course, they help individuals, but they are in the broad public interest. And that's what justifies actually pretty modest spending, which has saved I'm not sure if you've calculated the number of gallons stored, Brian, but it's pretty good bang for the buck. And just want to thank Transition again for the webinar for free administration, as I understand, of the rebate program. So keep that up. That's a good arrangement. Really appreciate that. So again, apologies for being late. Excellent presentation by Rhonan, Matt, and others, and thanks for the good work.
Thanks so much, Gary. We really appreciate it. It's been an interesting time, and we're really excited to hopefully roll out more programming like that. We have applied to the BC government for funding for a wood stove upgrade program to help people reduce the environmental impacts of wood stoves on Salt Spring. It's, you know, it's an environmental issue for sure in terms of the pollutants and toxins that come from burning wood to heat our homes. So we definitely have our fingers crossed, and we're not touching wood to get those. I wanted to ask Rhonan and Matt what they've seen. Can they characterize how things are changing with respect to the conversations you're hearing at the doorstep with respect to ponds or water storage systems? Well, what's your feel for what's going on out there in terms of public interest in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's always been an interest. Obviously, it continues to grow, but people have been doing it for quite a few years here. I've noticed it just keeps becoming top of mind for people, and you know, everybody's really keen to do their part, is my feeling, and they're always looking for ways to improve or increase their storage capacities. And yeah, I think it's great. Everyone's kind of dialed into it. Yeah.
Great. What have you noticed, Rhonan?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's still a lot more awareness. This seminar is really great for helping build that awareness. I mean, there's a lot of interest, but then everywhere I go that doesn't have any kind of rainwater harvesting, like on this island, everybody should catch rainwater. We should all be doing it, right? And we get so much rain in a year. There's really no water supply problem. There's a water storage problem. And so you mentioned ponds. For me, of course, I deal more in water storage tanks. So that's people call me, they're looking about tanks. So that's definitely my angle. So and it's more, it's cheaper and easier to start with, right? So ponds is definitely something to look into if you're looking for a large quantity of irrigation water. Obviously it's harder to keep pond water clean if you want to use it for potable water. So that's a different story. And pond features can be really nice, in your landscape as well.
Yeah, we had a question from Jana, who said, "Do you need to line a pond with clay?" Maybe I'll pipe in with my own story. I've got a crudely built pond, which acts as a passive water supply system for all of our blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries. And so it's got some clay in it just because of the native clay that was kind of pushed around when the Kubota came in, but yeah, you can line with clay. You can also line with rubberized liners, membranes as well, so that you can store the water. There are a whole bunch of different ways to do it. I love seeing. I don't know what Matt, you were probably cringing when you saw the film with Harry Burton and the system he's got. But man, I hats off to him. That guy has water till August, late August.
Yeah, not cringing at all. You see all kinds of systems and setups, right? So I think really for the greater good, like he's doing a great part, right? It's working for him, yeah. And yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the next time we have you on, Matt, you will be a PowerPoint and Zoom Pro, and we really appreciate you and Rhonan being here tonight. And Rhonan, I really wish I were where you were, where there's a nice sunset. So hope we can dial into that too. In the meantime,
hey, you all get the chance. This was on the ferry crossing over to Fulford Harbor a couple years ago.
Some other time, not now. Right now we get to enjoy the sound of our tanks filling up in our homes, and the sound of those people signing up to get on the wait list for the water rebate program next year. So thank you guys so much for your participation. And I think we're going to continue answering some questions as we wind up tonight. So keep that going. We will be posting the presentation as well. So you will have a chance to be able to share it with your neighbors and friends. Please do that. And we're finding increasing numbers of folks are beginning to do that. So that tells us that we're onto something in terms of a usable resource. So thanks once again to Shannon, Matt, and Rhonan, and to Gary, who pulled up the rear So thanks so much for coming, and also thank you, Maya. I think we have one more poll. Is that right, Maya?
Yes.
Before we get to the poll, is it possible to ask a question?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, yes. When one assesses your need or your storage needs before you start, is there some kind of a rule of thumb, a formula or calculation that one can use to do a rough calculation of approximately what your storage needs will be? For example, if I have an area of land of approximately 1/10 of an acre, and I want to irrigate that for half an hour for 3 days a week, is there some kind of a formula that I can use to do a very rough calculation of how much water I would need to store for that?
Yeah, so there is a calculation formula out there. It's typically based on 1 inch of water, or 0.62 would be the multiplier over an area. So you take the area that you have and you multiply it by 0.62, and that will give you the amount of water you would need to irrigate for an inch.
That's
okay,
great.
thanks.
That's wonderful. Well, once again, hats off to you guys for your work, and to Shannon as well for your work in our community, advocating for and bringing people together around this topic. It's definitely galvanized folks, and we look forward to doing more to help out Salt Springers in terms of having them learn about the topic, but also promoting the installation of water storage, be it ponds, tanks, or what have you. So thanks so much, you guys. So we're gonna start to wind up, and we'll start to wind up with our last poll. Is that right? Oh no, we have one more poll after this. So how do you feel about planning your rainwater system after attending tonight? More prepared and ready to get started, or I have more questions and would like some follow-up? Got a mix of both. We got it sort of about even. We're with folks who want to get going, and but folks who have more questions. Actually, folks who have more questions tells us that maybe some more time with Matt and Rhonan would be, and Shannon and others would be useful. So that's good for us to think about when we're planning our programming for the coach program for 2021-22, which we're starting to do now. So maybe we can end the poll and post it. Wonderful. That's great.
There was also a request, Brian, to type out in the chat the calculation that Matt offered.
Wonderful. Matt, can you go ahead and do that for the questioner?
Sorry, what was the question?
It was the question that the gentleman asked about how to do that calculation.
Yes. Yeah. So I can forward it to him, but basically, when you want to talk about irrigation, it's basically put on an inch of water putting down across an area. So it's length by width of your area, and the multiplier would be 0.62, which is what an inch of water would be. And
that's great. Thank you, Matt. So as we start to wind up, we're getting close to 11:30 or to the bottom of the hour. Rhonan, did you have a last word?
Yeah. Well, I just had a comment. A lot of people were asking in the chat about keeping tanks clean and algae. And I just remember there's something that didn't really come up, but I see it a lot in my work, and that is the more opaque a storage tank is, the less of a problem algae is. So I always recommend people use black tanks because it's more opaque. Of course, concrete or buried tanks, it solves that problem. Algae isn't necessarily that big of a problem for, it can actually be beneficial for irrigation, but it can also clog up filters and things like that. And it's just generally a good idea to use opaque storage to avoid that problem.
That's great, Rhonan. Thank you very much. Our 7x24 helpline is ready for your calls. So we have one more question. Actually, this is the clincher question. Want to see where your plans were. We had most everybody on the poll earlier on said they do not have a storage system. So what are we going to look at for 2022? I think we're going to have a lot of new ponds, Shannon. A lot of new tanks, rather, tanks or ponds. So that's really great to see. And Gary will be pleased. Gary will have to go on bended knee to Victoria and ask for more money. That's something I'd love to see.
Always happy to beg on behalf of the community.
That's great. I know you are. That's great. And can we share the results with folks? Excellent. That's really great. Thanks for answering those poll questions. They're helpful not only in terms of getting conversations started with the group that's listening at home, but also in helping us find out more about you. So I want to thank you, all of you, for attending the session tonight. This was a really great session. I learned a lot in listening to folks. And I want to tell you, for December, we have another wonderful webinar lined up as part of our Climate Action Coach series. Think of it as our Christmas gift to you. Join us for our third Climate Action Coach webinar, Save Big with Home Energy Assessments, Insulation, and Draft Sealing. We're going to turn you all into energy efficiency geeks by the time this year is out. It's going to be on Transition Tuesday, December the 7th, 7 p.m. on Zoom. What you can expect when you book on a home energy assessment. And home energy assessments are key to unlocking the rebates in the new federal program that's come out, and how doing an assessment can make you eligible for thousands of dollars in rebates. And of course, the big benefits of improving insulation and draft sealing your home. Admission is by suggested donation of $10, and that money goes to help us do more programming like this, and it's super easy to register. We've got the link in the chat. We'll also, in tomorrow's issue of the Driftwood, there will be a link to the webinar too, along with our monthly column, One Cool Island, or in our promo video, which will be coming soon to the Salt Spring Exchange and on our Facebook feed and Instagram feeds. And you can, of course, subscribe to those feeds as well, so that you can find out quickly what's happening in terms of our programming. And I want to say to you as we close that great programming like this doesn't happen like magic. It actually happens with a lot of hard work behind and in front of the scenes, like the work of our webinar engineer guru, Erin Ann Harper. Help us deliver more programming like this to help islanders and BCers from all over take climate action. Our hardworking volunteer directors, including myself and others, and committee volunteers, along with our part-time staff, are like all of you, also part of the magic. So really, folks, let's get there together in terms of taking climate action. It's easy to become a monthly or even a one-time donor. To send us a smile on whatever amount you care to give, go to transitionsaltspring.com. We've got that link in the chat as well, and click donate. It's really that easy. Donating means that we can work with other organizations on Salt Spring to lower our emissions and get more happening to prepare for the climate shifts that are really already underway. Think heat dome. Like an exciting new project that you're going to hear about soon, which is a restoration project up in the Lake Maxwell watershed. More to come on that. We're very excited to be the recipients of some important funding, and we'll give you details on that shortly. But you can help make it happen quickly and more broadly by donating generously to transitionsaltspring.com. So I want to thank you so much for listening so attentively. So thanks for coming all the way from your homes and your living rooms to share some time with us. And we really do look forward to hosting you again next month for our webinar. And please do pay attention. You can also sign up for our newsletter. You can go to transitionsaltspring.com and sign up for our monthly newsletter that also has news that you can use around what we can be doing with respect to climate change. So thanks on behalf of the whole team here at Transition Salt Spring and our wonderful guests. Thank you. Have a good night and safe driving home. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for coming.